All right, talking about MADS today, ladies and gentlemen. The MADS scientist organization headed up by Dr. Vegapunk. For peace. For peace. Remember that. Gathering the greatest scientists from all over the world. Caesar Clown, Judge Vinsmoke, and Queen for the purposes of peace and peace alone. Actually, it's weird. We still don't know Queen's real name, because I'm assuming Queen was the code name he was given when he joined Kaido's crew. Like, we know King's real name. It's Albert. He didn't actually have the name King when he was found by Kaido at Punk Hazard. So I wonder what Queen's real name is. It's probably something normal. It's probably like Dave Smith or something. But anyway, I'm really excited because I get to do an intro for this video that I could not have done in like my previous studio when I filmed all the videos on the edge of my bed, because now I have an actual chair that swivels, okay? So I'm gonna do that thing that all mad scientists do in movies where the hero shows up in the control room and then they spin around in their swivel chair and they're doing the devious finger pyramid thing like, Mr. Bond. All right, here we go. Ah, yes, Mr. Secret Agent Guy. You have reached the final obstacle in your journey. But little did you know, while you were fighting against my robot sentry army, I developed the device that will eliminate you once and for all. This iron! It has 10 settings for various steaming applications. All right, I'm gonna stop that now. Okay. Why, you don't just keep an iron on your desk? What, you're the weird one. I don't know, man. Okay, so anyway, MADS. All right. So this video might be a little bit like you'd figure I was gonna wait a little bit while for this to talk about the history of MADS, because we don't really know much about it, but I take that to be a challenge. I think we know enough about MADS that I can piece it together with the timeline fairly well, and if I'm wrong, I guess we'll find out. Also, you just never know what Oda is going to expand upon, because like the situation is like a lot of times in the SBS, Oda will come out and be like, yeah, I really wanted to talk about the relationship between Sabo and Koala and Hack in the Revolutionary Army, but I didn't really have time to do it in the story, so he just throws it in the SBS. Kind of the same thing that happened to Zoro and the whole thing with Ushimaru Shimosuke and everything like that. Like, we might get that later on in the story, we might not, we don't know. He might explain it in a data book, who knows. So we don't know if that's the situation with MADS, because we're finding out the history of MADS in a very unique way. We're finding it out in the cover story. It's also the first instance in the world of One Piece, in the story, in the manga, where the cover series, the events happening there are happening concurrently with the events of the actual manga, like where we had, Kuzan and Van Augur arriving and taking Pudding back to Blackbeard, and that's actually like what's going on right now in the story. It wasn't like something that happened like months or years ago in the cover story or something else that's unrelated to the main plot, okay? So anyway, this is going to be a history of MADS, which is basically a little bit of a history of Vegapunk. So we got to start this 65 years ago when Vegapunk was born. So we know Vegapunk's age, so that makes things a little bit more, easy to look at. It's like, okay, 65 years ago, Vegapunk was born, and we know the island he was born on, because we actually saw the island he was from well before he was ever introduced as a character, and that is Karakuri Island. Not Katakuri Island, Karakuri Island. Katakuri Island, actually, Katakuri does have his own island, but that's in the New World. Karakuri Island is located in Paradise, and it's the kingdom of the future land of Baltimore, all right? So this was the island, of course, Franky got sent by Kuma after the events of Sabaody. So we learn a little bit about Vegapunk's past there. We know he had a lab on that island. The top level of the island was more about, like, developing kind of technology to improve your daily life. There was also a factory there to develop weaponry using science. There was the massive spike in the mountain that the people of Baltimore stated that Vegapunk tried to create an island warming device. This would be something that he would perfect with the island aircon system at Egghead Island. So it just goes to show that Vegapunk is a bit of a perfectionist, and even if he fails at something, he will keep trying at it until he finally succeeds. He has very, very high standards to live up to that he sets himself, but he keeps working on it no matter what. So you can see the beginnings of that on Karakuri Island. I wanted to see if there was anything else going on in the One Piece world around 65 years ago that might connect back to Vegapunk, and I really didn't find anything. 66 years ago, so 1 year before Vegapunk was born, was the year that Haradis, the weather wizard that lives on Weatheria, the one that trained Nami, actually set out to create Weatheria with a bunch of his colleagues. I don't think this connects back to Vegapunk at all, but I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a baseline of like what was going on in the One Piece world 65 years ago. So, you know, this was right around the time that Haradis and the other weather wizards were building the Sky Island of Weatheria that Nami would eventually end up at. Haradis is pretty old. He's like in his late 90s. He's one of the oldest characters in One Piece, other than Dr. Kureha, who's like 140, who like blows everybody else out of the water. But Haradis and Stroyson, I think, are both in like their late 90s, okay? So that was 66 years ago. 63 years ago, so when Vegapunk was 2, that was when Big Mom's backstory occurred. When Big Mom was at Elbath, and then the events occurred there with Mother Caramel, and then they left Elbath, and, you know, the Semla and everything like that. And then Big Mom met Stroyson, and that effectively started the Big Mom Pirates 2 years after Vegapunk was born. I don't think any of those events, like the Haradis thing and the Big Mom stuff, has anything to do with Vegapunk directly at this point, but I just wanted to, you know, if there was anything going on in the One Piece world, those were the major events, okay? So he was born on Karakuri. We don't know how long he lived there, but I'm assuming he was a child prodigy. We do not know when Vegapunk ate the brain fruit. Now, it's important to mention, even without the brain fruit, he was already a genius. So I can imagine Vegapunk at like age 8 already developing like steam power and like diesel punk and you know, atomic punk and all that kind of stuff, you know, like aesthetics for the island, already making cyborg animals and everything like that, or developing, you know, what would later become the stuff we see on Egghead Island. I can already see him at that point. What the brain fruit did to him was that it allowed him to basically have infinite storage space and access this whenever he wanted, just to make everything a lot easier, okay? So Vegapunk, in theory, didn't need, like, you know, you have a computer to store everything, to make sure you keep track of it all, or like a phone, or like a PDA or something. He didn't even have to write anything down, probably. For the most part, Vegapunk just stores everything in his brain, 100% perfect recall, eidetic memory, and that was the brain fruit. Now, the youngest that we've seen Vegapunk is when he formed MADS. We see that image in the cover series where we see MADS right after they formed, is the implication, where you see Queen in his younger years where he's like thin and he's like ripped, and then we also seen Caesar and Judge there, and also a mysterious figure that actually turns out to be, spoilers, Miss Buckingham Stussy, who was also a member of MADS, okay? But this is decades later. This is when Vegapunk has already left Karakuri Island, so I'm not really sure how old he was when he ate the brain fruit, but I am assuming that he probably ate the fruit while he was on Karakuri Island. I think he ate that fruit when he was on the island developing his technology, and he was like very frustrated with like, oh my god, I wish my brain could just store more knowledge. I have all this information, but I have nowhere to put it all. I have to write everything down. This is so troubling. I wish I just had perfect access to my memory. And maybe that's when he discovered the brain fruit. We're learning a lot about devil fruits lately. So, you know, devil fruits, at least zones we know, have wills of their own. What if other devil fruits have wills? What if devil fruits can, in some capacity, choose their next wielder? I only bring this up because there's a lot of devil fruits that have users that are like perfect for their fruit. Like Law is probably the perfect person to have the op fruit. Luffy is the perfect person to have the Gamu no Mi, right? That's a zone, though, and we already know zones have wills. That's already been straight up confirmed in the story. But I'm just saying, if it's the case with zones, maybe all devil fruits have a level of sentience or a will, and so the brain fruit was drawn to Vegapunk. Who knows, okay? So, one thing to keep in mind involving MADS is the age difference between Vegapunk and the other members. So Vegapunk is about 10 years older than Judge and Queen and Caesar. All right. Now, Caesar's age, fun thing, was actually retconned. It was actually changed in one of the data books because it just did not make sense otherwise. Caesar's original age when he was like first shown up at Punk Hazard was stated to be 40. But when you actually look at the backstory with all this stuff, like MADS existed right after God Valley, like a few years after God Valley had occurred and the Rocks Pirates split up, and that was 38 years ago. And we see Caesar like as an adult, like working in the lab with MADS, you know, in that cover series, in that cover story spread. So Caesar, you know, a couple years after God Valley, so let's say like 35 years ago, Caesar would have been 5. So it doesn't make any sense. So Caesar is 55 years old, and then Judge and Queen are 56 years old, and Vegapunk is 65 years old right now in the story, okay? So I was thinking like maybe it was possible that Vegapunk could have started MADS when he was still on Baltimore, you know, maybe like when Vegapunk was around 20 years old is when he started MADS, and maybe like it was just himself. Maybe he called it MADS and that was maybe his little operation, but no, I think MADS was the name that they all came and decided upon when they set out to sea in their ship that was funded by Dufeld, okay, who was the leader of the Dufeld conglomerate. He was the one that funded their operation as the Scientists for Peace, because it was a philanthropic endeavor that Dufeld thought like, oh, I can make money off of this. Okay, yeah, scientists making stuff. Yeah, sure, for peace, whatever you say. Just, you know, just make sure that money's being generated and I'll fund you and everything like that, and we have like a business relationship, okay? So, for that reason, I think MADS probably formed, I put down about 3 years after God Valley, because that's really the moment everything kind of coincides together. Because for one thing, Buckingham Stussy, who is stated to be a member of the Rocks crew, but also a freeloader of MADS, was a member of MADS, and she was on that cover spread. That cover spread where we see all of them together, where we see Vegapunk, Caesar, Judge, and Queen, and then Buckingham Stussy from the back. You know, she's looking away. We don't see her face there. When they're all standing there in that cool pose, I like to think that was when MADS was founded. That was like the picture they took. It was like, all right, everybody, we found this new organization, the Scientists for Peace. Let's pick up rifles and all take pictures together for peace, you know? So that's like when it formed, all right? Now, Stussy was already there, and I feel like, yeah, MADS had, Rocks had to have already been disbanded by the time that Stussy joined MADS. She was part of Rocks' crew. She was hanging out there. She was a freeloader on that crew, I guess, and then God Valley occurred, and then, you know, we had Roger and Garp teaming up to defeat Rocks, and then that crew disbanded, and we had Whitebeard and Big Mom and Kaido and Captain John and Shiki and Wang Ji all heading out to different parts of the world to, you know, continue their pirating careers. And Stussy was just kind of like, oh, okay, I need somewhere to go, you know, just to kind of like, you know, mooch off of, basically. And so she ended up at MADS, all right? Also, it makes Vegapunk's age an even 30, which would make Judge and Queen 21, and Caesar would be 20. And, yeah, I think that would probably work, you know, considering the cover page and how we all saw them. Like, they were, you know, like Queen and Judge and Caesar were in their younger years, and they were just getting started on their adventure. And that's right around the same age range that the Straw Hats were when they headed out to sea. So I'm thinking, okay, that's probably accurate right there. Like, Vegapunk was around 30, and then, you know, Judge and Queen and everybody were in their early 20s. Stussy actually, Stussy's actually older than Vegapunk right now, okay? Well, Buckingham Stussy is. Clone Stussy is younger, but you know how it is. Also, I just remembered another clue with this, honestly. Maybe MADS was formed 36 years ago, because Weevil, whose age was confirmed to be 35, is most likely is a clone of Whitebeard that was created under MADS. I guess we don't know that 100%, but seems to be very clearly the case now that we have clones everywhere in One Piece, okay? So, if Weevil was born 35 years ago in the MADS laboratory, okay, then maybe tack on an extra year for that, just for the sake of, like, okay, we have to have the clone tech and, like, grow, you know, Weevil and everything like that, I don't know. And, okay, so maybe 36 years ago is when MADS was formed, okay? But the same basic idea. So let's go with 36. Let's like 2 years after the events of God Valley. I think that fits rather well. Okay. So after that, though, we don't have exact dates for the next few events, but I can come up with some ideas. So the next big event is that Vegapunk wins the the Ibel Peace Prize, all right, which is the variation of it's a parody of the Nobel Peace Prize that exists in our world. That's the version of it that exists in One Piece. That's, I'm assuming, given to someone that has some crazy, you know, revolutionary invention that could change the world. And the invention that Vegapunk came up with was a specific type of flower that only blooms in gunpowder. So I assumed it was like turning war-torn countries into like fertile soil to like grow crops. Other people came up with the direction of like, well, what if it's an invention that makes warfare ineffective because all the gunpowder is just redundant, or rather inert, because it just grows flowers out of it. Okay, so you can't use it to like blast things out of a tank or something like that. Okay, so either way, because it's the Ibel Peace Prize, it really helped out the world, and Vegapunk wins that award. Meanwhile, Caesar and Judge and Queen are all like horrified, you know, just like disgusted by Vegapunk creating science for peace and for good. It's just, ugh. You know, meanwhile, Caesar's developing the artificial devil fruit. Queen is making all these viruses. Judge is working on, you know, the cloning tech and, you know, his spear, his like, you know, like rocket spear and everything to improve the Germa and get them back into power in the north. Okay, so all this stuff's going on the side. Well, Vegapunk is genuinely trying to make the world a better place. Okay, yeah, so they have this ship, and that's like their main source of, like, that's their main laboratory where they're sailing around and doing all these inventions. It's like a mobile fortress that's funded by Dufeld. Everything seems to be going okay. In fact, really okay, because the next major event is that Vegapunk meets with the Gorosei, the 5 elder stars that, for the sake of most of the people in the world that know, they run the entire world. They run the world government. They're at the very top. They're the group of 5 elders that decide everything, okay? Of course, we know as the fan base that Eam exists, but the rest of the world doesn't know that, okay? So, you know, the idea that Vegapunk was invited to go to Marijois, to go into the Room of Authority. Do you know how few people have been able to have an audience with the Gorosei? How many civilians, how many non-government or marine operatives have been given an audience with the Gorosei? We've seen Cypherpole report to the Gorosei, obviously. We saw that with even Spondum back during Water 7, who is a member of CP5. We saw him reporting to the Gorosei. We see Sakazuki, of course, the Fleet Admiral, reporting to the Gorosei. That makes sense. He's the Fleet Admiral of the Navy. But when it comes to non-government or marine, you know, agents or whatever, the only people that have met with the Gorosei are Vegapunk, that we know of, and Shanks. But Shanks is sort of also like high status, where Shanks, I don't think, really gave him much of a choice. Shanks was just kind of like, Shanks was the one that set the date and time for that meeting, okay? Shanks was like, hey, listen, I'm meeting with the Gorosei. I need to talk to you about something. And the Gorosei are not stupid enough to be like, oh yeah, Shanks, whatever, a pirate cannot come here. It's like, are you sure you want to turn me away at the door? You know, are you sure you want to do the whole, like, sorry, the Gorosei aren't in today, you know? Would you like to leave a message? Do you really want to put me to voicemail? You know what I mean? Shanks, and it's just like, okay, fair enough. So Shanks got a meeting, but that just goes to show you how, like, rare this is. So I don't think this is like, hey, you did really good on this, like, hey, you drew a really cool piece of artwork, you get to go meet the Gorosei. Hey, you scored the winning point in whatever sport they play in One Piece, you get to go to meet the Gorosei to shake their hands. No, it's even bigger than that. It's like a huge deal to meet with the Gorosei, the 5 leaders of everything in the world, essentially. So the fact that Vegapunk was asked to go meet with them, I don't think it was just an awards ceremony. I don't think it was just a moment where Vegapunk walked in and, like, all the Gorosei are there and, like shake his hand. He's like, oh, Dr. Vegapunk, your endeavors in peace and science are really going to change the world. Here, have a medal, have this cool little plaque, and then this certificate of awesomeness. All right, bye. We got to work on stuff. No, I think that was the moment where the Gorosei were going to get something from Vegapunk. The Gorosei were like, hey, we need this Vegapunk guy. We need to meet with him. We need to talk with him. We need to see if he can start working for us, okay? Because he's out there on his own independently in MADS making a bunch of crazy stuff. But if he was working for us, it'd be a different story. Now, when do I think the Ibel Peace Prize and when Vegapunk met the Gorosei, when did that happen, okay? Well, we know that by the time Vegapunk met the Gorosei, it was pretty close to the time where he met Dragon at Ohara. So let's skip ahead very briefly to the next moment that we actually do have a date for, okay? So the destruction of Ohara, when it was Buster Called, occurred 22 years ago. About 6 months after the destruction of Ohara is when Vegapunk, at age 43, arrived to pay his respects, and he met Dragon there. Now, Dragon and Vegapunk were already acquaintances at that point. However, at that moment, Vegapunk had a mustache. When he met the Gorosei, he didn't have a mustache, but other than that, he looked remarkably similar to that meeting with Dragon. He had just a little bit of like a 5 o'clock shadow, like a little bit of stubble above his lip, okay, when he met with the Gorosei. And then flash forward to when he met with Dragon at Ohara, and he had a full mustache that was like pointy, okay? Same mustache he has now, actually. So, I'm thinking it was probably a couple of years before he met Dragon, before Ohara is when he met the Gorosei. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. If Ohara was Buster Called 22 years ago, and Vegapunk met with the Gorosei a couple of years before then and joined the government. That's another thing, too. When Dragon... I know it doesn't take 2 full years to grow a mustache, but I have more evidence than that. Because Dragon also stated, hey, you joined the government. Why would you do that? Like Dragon was very upset. It was like the first time Dragon and Vegapunk had talked since he had joined the government. Okay, so they were acquaintances already, but then Vegapunk joined the government and Dragon was very upset with that, okay? So they hadn't seen each other in a little while, all right? So at least a few years, okay? So what happened? Was there any major event in the One Piece world that occurred a couple of years before Ohara that might have been the impetus for the Gorosei requesting an audience with the greatest scientist in the world and give him a job offer to start working for the government and the Marines? Couple of years before Ohara. 23 years ago, 24 years ago. That's a tough one. Oh, wait. Wasn't there, like, that really powerful pirate? He was a successful pirate, too. Oh, man. Name's escaping me. Henry Avery. No, not him. But he was the king of some kind of piracy. Oh, wait a minute! Goldie Roger! Yeah, okay, so, Goldie Roger, matey! Yes, I was the king of the pirates! Okay. Roger was executed 24 years ago, kicking off the great pirate era, the search for the One Piece, piracy activities just skyrocket, go through the roof. The government, the Marines, they're in chaos. They have a massive headache. They were like, getting rid of the king of the pirates was supposed to end piracy, not make it worse. How does that even work? Roger. So, but they were like, okay, they were a little desperate. They were like, we need to figure out some way to balance the scales here. All right. Piracy's through the roof. So we need to figure out something else. Okay. So it's like, hey, there's this group called MADS. They probably sent Cypher Pole out there and, get the connections and everything like that. And they reported back to the Gorosei, like, yeah, there's this organization called MADS, and it's headed up by Dr. Vegapunk, who's, like, the greatest scientist in the world. And he won the Ibel Peace Prize and everything, and he did some crazy stuff. And they're inventing, like, weaponry, too. Like, because they would be aware of, like, what Judge and Caesar and Queen were all doing. So they're like, yeah, this is a place that maybe working for us could really help us out a little bit here, okay? And so that was when the Gorosei asked Vegapunk for an audience. They came, they shook his hand, they gave him a medal, it's great, but then they might have not even have been a choice for Vegapunk. They might have told him in no uncertain terms, maybe like kind of passive-aggressively, kind of like, do you want to work for us? We'll pay you this much, we'll give you a lab, we'll give you an island, and maybe Vegapunk's like, well, I'll think about it, and then the Gorosei are like, yeah, well... So you're going to work for us, right? Yeah. It's just like, oh, it's not an option, is it? Like, no, not really. It's just like, okay. So, or maybe they would have just asked him because, Queen and Judge, they left. They didn't, Caesar stayed and worked with Vegapunk at Punk Hazard. But beyond that, the Queen and Judge got the hell out of there. but Queen and Judge, they left. They got out of there. So, I guess Stussy as well. They both left. They all left. So, Stussy might have left before then. It might have not have been well to the very, very end. Because Buckingham Stussy was only in the background of that one panel when MADS was, founded. And then she does not appear in any of the other cover stories when, Queen and Judge and Caesar are all, fighting with each other. We don't see her anymore. So, she might have not have been they might have kicked her out because she was, stated to be a freeloader. So, she was there at the foundation of it. Weevil was born there. The clone of Stussy was born there. But maybe a couple of years into MADS, they basically evicted her. They kicked her out. He's like, okay, you're eating too many Cheetos. Get out of here. You're a drain on us. Okay, leave. So, okay, if that's the situation, though, where Roger's execution was the impetus for asking Vegapunk to join, that would have been 24 years ago. He joined the government, he grew that mustache, and then he met with Dragon at O'Hara 2 years later. So that would have established Vegapunk. He's like, I can't believe you've been working for the government now for 2 years. And he's like, hey, I need money to fund my operation. Your operation, the freedom fighters, they're not going to, you guys are poor. You don't have any money. And Dragon's like, it's like, soon we will, though. We're going places, right? So yeah, that's basically the history of MADS from what we know of. Everything after this, we don't know anything beyond MADS. Vegapunk worked for the government, obviously, modified Kuma and everything like that. However, there's one more piece of the timeline I want to address here before we get to the present, okay? So, this is a theory that I did not come up with, but it's out there. You can read about it on, the Reddit and, One Piece forums and stuff, and I love this theory because not only does it involve my favorite character in the One Piece story, it also addresses something that is already a question in and of itself, okay? So, 10 years ago, when Vegapunk would have been 55, although Vegapunk's not directly involved in this, okay? So, 10 years ago, Franky, or rather Cutty Flam, as he was known back then, was struck by the sea train. That was when all of the events with Tom occurred at Water 7, and he got taken away by the sea train, and then Cutty Flam tried to stop it. He got hit by the train, got knocked off. All of his bones and muscles were torn and broken, and he was just lying half dead in the ocean. Somehow he did not die, okay? Now, this is where a little bit of my memory failed me because I always just, whenever I remembered this scene, I always remembered it as Franky floated to Scrap Island, which was an island that was outside of Water 7, which is eventually where they would build the Franky house. He floated to Scrap Island, the place where all the scrap metal and everything gets thrown, and then Franky got out of the water, and he was, really close to death, and he shambled into the scrap. He's like, need to repair myself. Better. Stronger. Install an iron. Just and he makes himself into a cyborg. Battle Franky Model 36, okay? That's not what happened. That's not what happened. Franky did not float to Scrap Island. Franky was just floating in the middle of the ocean, unable to move, and then a random ship, just a ghost ship, just floats by him. And then Franky's like, okay. And he manages to climb up on the ship. No one is there. It is a derelict ship afloat in the Grand Line. But it's a modern ship. It's not some, wooden vessel that's falling apart. We see a lot of wooden sailing vessels in One Piece. This was a metal ship that was floating. And it's just even the Marines still use wooden ships, I think. At least part of them. I think it's reinforced with steel. But this was a more modern kind of ship that just kind of floats over. Franky gets on the ship, and then he repairs himself. He doesn't just repair himself. He makes himself into a battle cyborg. Capable of grappling hooks and coup de vent, air cannons and stuff. He goes the whole 9 yards with this. This is not the material that you would find on a random, there's a lot of ships that I'm sure are just abandoned in the Grand Line. People, they're the weather patterns and everything. A lot of bad stuff happens in the Grand Line. It's known as the ship graveyard or the pirate graveyard, right? So I can imagine there's a lot of ships just floating around, but this is a modern metal ship made of steel that has enough material on it for Franky to not just repair himself, but turn himself into the $6 million man or whatever, really repair himself to the point where he is a straight up battle cyborg, okay, where it saved his life, which means I always made the joke that Franky had to be this brilliant surgeon, all right, because like he repaired himself from near death using nothing but scrap metal. So I'm like, man, he has to be a better surgeon than Law in order, or just as good in order to do that. What if that wasn't the case? What if he literally found like the infirmary on this ship that was the former MADS ship, and they had all this kind of future like healing potion and like stem packs or whatever, and like that was able to like he found some like medical kit, and he just like, you know, like, and it like liquid skin or something that like healed his wounds, or, you know, fixed his broken bones or his muscles or something, because it was future tech, because this was the MADS ship. And if MADS was truly the laboratory for peace, yeah, Caesar, Judge, and Queen were doing other stuff, but Vegapunk was still very dedicated to the whole peace message, all right, to the humanitarianism and everything like that, okay? So you know Vegapunk was probably working a little bit, dabbling in medical science. Like, here's a type of gel that will cure any, seal any wound, or here's a type of, you know, maybe like a shot you can take that'll like mend your bones or heal muscle tears or something like that. So that's how Franky managed to not die, and then he also found all this weapon technology. Like, this is insane that this place is here, okay? So yeah, go back and read the chapter. It's just a ship that just... Now, granted, the ship in that backstory does not look like the MADS ship. The MADS ship is very small, and it's very different. It doesn't have MADS stencils on the side. But, you know, you could chalk that up to just like Oda wrote this chapter with Franky and the ship. He wrote that like well over a decade ago. Actually, I think it might be, well, not 20 years ago, but like 15 years ago is probably over that is when this chapter came out, all right? There's been other things like that. Like the first time Oda drew the Oro Jackson, it did not look like the Oro Jackson proper with like the egg. And that's just artwork developing. It's like whatever. You know, Roger didn't look the same in chapter 1 as he does now, okay? Like so artwork will change. Oda will add some extra stuff. But the basic core of it is there. The basic core of this theory is that like Franky stumbled upon the derelict MADS ship that was abandoned with all the future tech still on there, and he fixed himself up. So it's almost like now second time that Franky has improved himself because of Vegapunk's technology. And I think this is going to go circle back around in the Egghead arc where we're at right now, where Vegapunk is 65 years old, okay, meeting the Straw Hats with the satellites and everything like that. The first time is Vegapunk saved Franky indirectly by repairing him to BF-36, and then he also helped him get stronger when he went to Karakuri, and now he's in his laboratory, where Franky can now have access to even greater technological advancements. I love that theory. I love that theory, and I really hope it's true, okay? So, yeah. Anyway, that's the video for you guys today. History of MADS. We'll see how this all lines up in the actual story. If we find out a timeline for any of this stuff, we'll see where it goes. I don't have Rhino Facts today. Sorry, I don't have it. But I do have one more episode of that before I want to finish it off. So next time we'll get to Rhino Facts. But anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Teching signing out. Later.